Thank you very much for attending today's event. And a very warm welcome from me, Mohammed. By the way, I'm none of the things he said here. Tonight's discussion is, or our title is, what will the autumn bring after the Arab Spring? We have seen an unprecedented series of events unfold in the Middle East. With the revolutions, we've seen many rulers and tyrants fall at the hand of the masses. In Tunisia, in Egypt, and recently in Libya, we have seen the death of Gaddafi. But the removal of dictators has not manifested itself in the change of the system. Clearly, the Arab revolutions are unstoppable and the momentum is ongoing. The Arab revolutions has opened up a political vacuum in the Middle East. What system will fill this vacuum and lead to the change that the people have worked for and struggled for? And tonight we have two prominent speakers, Reza Pankhurst and Ahmed Shebani. Reza Pankhurst spent 4 years as a political prisoner and conscience in Egypt during the Mubarak regime between 2002 and 2006, due to his membership of Hizb Tahrir. Upon his return to the UK, he entered academic, achieving a master's and then a PhD at the London School of Economics, LSE. His research covered the Islamic movements in the Middle East, seeing the return of the Islamic Caliphate. The research will be published as a book in 2012 by the Columbia University Press. He's also the editor of the New Civilization the editor of New Civilization. On my right, we have Ahmed Shebani, a civil engineer, the founder of the Democratic Party in Libya. He wants to build an Islamic democracy, a secular Islam. He's a politician and a civil rights activist, human rights activist. He's a respected Libyan politician and an affairs specialist. He wants to build a secular democracy in Libya. Without further ado, I'm going to give it to Reza Pankhurst, who have 10 minutes to present his views, and then I'm going to give Ahmed Shebani the same as well. Without any further ado.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and thank you very much for the University and the Society for the invitation. And Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all of you inside the crowd. I came expecting a panel discussion. It seems like it might end up to be a bit of a debate. We will have to wait and see. But I'll use this short time just to briefly recap. Because 1 year ago, on the 13th of December, we had not seen any of what we've seen in the last year. 13th of December, the world was a very different place, especially if you're living inside the Middle East. Because it was the 17th of December that Bouazizi set himself alight and began the chain of events which ended up with these revolutions that we've been seeing around the place. But what was Tunisia like on the 13th of December? And how was the Tunisian regime perceived on the 13th of December, and even after that? The Tunisian regime, for example, and I'll cover the other regimes as well, but the Tunisian regime was seen as a very secular regime, a progressive regime, a very close Western ally. It had won praise for its economic policies by the IMF, and of course we've seen the value of that praise, not only vis-a-vis Tunisia, but vis-a-vis the whole world actually. And even once the revolution really took root against Ben Ali and his regime, the ministers in France continued to praise Ben Ali and the regime, saying he's not really a dictator, saying he had brought a lot of good to the country, to the point that the foreign minister, embarrassingly for France, even offered that we would send police to Tunisia to show them some know-how, in order to teach them how to deal with this particular uprising. So this was happening in Tunisia. If we look in the Mubarak regime before the revolution began in January, the Mubarak regime was the closest American ally in the region, the second largest recipient of military aid from the United States. Even on the day that the revolutions began in Egypt in January, Sami Anan, the chief of staff of the Egyptian military, was inside the United States, because they're always over in the United States. It was even rumored that Mohammed Tantawi, who is the general, the leader of the military, Mubarak was the head of the state and he was the head of the military, flew over to the United States once the revolutions began in order to get the advice and get the instructions face to face. And since then, since the revolution, by the way, Mohammed Tantawi is now the de facto president of the United States. This is a man who was described in WikiLeaks cables. He was described by Egyptian officers as being Mubarak's poodle. This is Mubarak's poodle, is now the man running Egypt after the uprisings at the time. The economy during the time of Mubarak was also liberalized, with his son Gamal Mubarak leading the way on that, and the Prime Minister Ahmed Nadif heading, a government of technocrats to liberalize the economy, along with such figures like Najib Suarez, who was also recovering and prominent again in this after uprising period. Now, when the uprisings began against the Mubarak regime and people started going into Tahrir Square, the reaction of their close ally, Tunisia, was the French. Egypt, of course, the Americans. Vice President Joe Biden said Mubarak is a close ally. Not only that, he said Mubarak should not be described as a dictator. Dictator is the wrong word to refer to Mubarak. When Mubarak was actually overthrown by the people, it got to a stage where it was too much to try and accept Mubarak to stay, so there was a change whereby the whole regime which Mubarak left behind remained in place, but they removed Mubarak. When that took place, McCain tweeted, he's up to date, he tweeted, "Regrettably, the time has come for, number 4, for President Mubarak to step down and relinquish power." Now, of course, it was very regrettable for the United States that McCain had to, that Mubarak had to step down and relinquish power, because he had been a close ally for the United States, not only in terms of vis-a-vis economics, but actually vis-a-vis the security of Israel, vis-a-vis standing up or being a blockade against the Islamic opposition within the country. And he was an exceptionally good ally of the CIA. The CIA, we hear about renditions. Renditions are not something new. Renditions were taking place since the mid-1990s with Egypt. American CIA would arrest people in Albania or in other places, deliver them to the Egyptian government. Now they're such close friends, and the Egyptians are so willing to help out the CIA. When the CIA, according to WikiLeaks linked cables again, when the CIA requested DNA of one of the prisoners that they had delivered, or that the Egyptians had, Omar Suleiman, another stalwart of the Egyptian regime, who is still, by the way, heavily involved with the regime, Omar Suleiman asked him, "Sure, we'll send you his arm." Yeah, so you need the DNA, fine, we'll cut his arm off and send it to you. This is the level of which they were, collaborating or working subservient to the Americans. So, of course, the Americans were very much concerned about losing Mubarak and the Mubarak regime. Libya, Gaddafi in the recent years had become, more embraced by the West, particularly Britain. Even his son coming to the London School of Economics, to their shame, even though his grades didn't justify him getting onto any PhD program, but still, he did so, and this is all part of the whole scheme of things. Tony Blair wrote to Oxford, they refused, But in any case, there was a program of economic liberalization going on again, headed by people like Mahmoud Jibril. Mahmoud Jibril was one of the major faces in who? The Libyan opposition during the uprising against Gaddafi. Actually, Mustafa al-Jalil as well was the former justice minister, but at least he has a clean conscience according to the public opinion regarding him. Now, Libya as well had a lot of CIA and MI5 collaboration. Yes? We might have think that the Gaddafi regime was such an enemy of the United States, whereas actually people like Abdul Hakim Belhaj were arrested by the CIA, arrested by the Malaysians, handed to the CIA. The CIA tortured him and handed him over to the Gaddafi regime. Not just him, others as well. So the CIA had a relationship with the Gaddafi regime, again in what? As part of their so-called war of terror, in other words, keeping down the Muslim or Islamic opposition inside these countries. Even the Libyan Islamic opposition had rejected the viewpoint, for example, of Al-Qaeda from many, many years before that. But still, this is their collaboration with them. So what were the people rebelling against? This is a snapshot of what these regimes were. They were rebelling against these oppressive police states. They were rebelling against these states which oppressed mostly the Islamic opposition in these countries. No, not exclusively, but the vast majority of the opposition to them, which was oppressed, was the Islamic opposition. They were rebelling against what were basically client regimes who upheld the interests, economic and geopolitical, of nations such as, or mainly, the United States, but also France and Britain. And so the question has to come, would a nation like America, which is the dominant superpower in the world, even though it's going through this economic crisis, just to let you have an idea of its spending on the military. American spending on military per year is more than the next 21 countries in the world added together. You wonder why they owe so much money. They're building all of their destroyers and aircraft carriers. All of that is on Chinese money or whatever money. But the point being, more than the next 21 countries. That's including China, that's including Russia, that's including Iran. You know, people like to think about the threat of Iran. That's including all those other countries, 21. So what do they do when they face these kind of situations? Noam Chomsky made a very nice, short, brief comment. He said, what Americans do when they're about to lose a dictator, when they see a dictator under pressure, is they back that dictator to the hilt. This is the first thing. They back the dictator to the hilt. If that works, fine. Like in Bahrain. Bahrain, there was an uprising, there was an Arab Spring, squashed. We can go into the details, no need to do it. But, you know, the Americans had their geopolitical interest there with the 5th Army Fleet. When it doesn't work, i.e. the people are too much against the regime, such as in Egypt, you try and quickly jump on the other side. The side of, we'll have a democracy inside this country. We'll allow the people to have choice. But they'll never allow the people to have choice, because the people themselves, their choice goes against American interests, whether geopolitical or economic inside the region. So they'd be foolish to let the people have a choice. There's no way they would openly allow the people to have the choice when 80 to 90% of the population in the Middle East, according to polls, think that America is the greatest threat to world peace. When they all want, in Egypt, the majority of the people, they want the annulment of the Camp David Treaty with Israel. All of these kind of issues, they all want the implementation of Islam. More than 80%, 90% in Egypt, wanting the full implementation of Islam. All of this goes against American interests. No way are they going to suddenly put their hands up and say, we'll allow the people to have free choice. So what they come with instead is they say, we'll allow you to have democracy. And then all of the rules of the game are set very carefully by whoever's in charge of that process. So in Egypt, you have the ex-Mubarak backers, people like Tantawi running the ship, managing the elections. In Libya at the moment, you have the NTC. Even now, people are beginning to wonder, NTC, well, we don't really trust them. Just yesterday and today, there have been protests, where? In Benghazi of all places. In Benghazi, which was the base of the NTC, that's where the protests are beginning against the NTC, because people recognize and realize that there's no transparency going on, and they're handing the power over to people who are just going to continue the same politics of the previous regimes, but perhaps with a little bit more openness in the political arena than before. So, all of the things that the people want in the region, which is what? Independence. The people want independence. When the people were chanting against Mubarak, what did they chant? They chanted, Ya Sahyuni, Ya Jaban, Ya Amir al-American, which means, oh you Zionist, oh you coward, oh you agent of the Americans. That was their chant against Hosni Mubarak. So they're looking for independence in a geopolitical sense. They're looking for unity. Unity, you know, the first Jum'ah, after which Mubarak was overthrown. Do you know what one of the main chants was inside Tahrir Square? One of the main chants was, Al-Quds Ga'in Shuhada bil Mala'in, which means, Quds, we're coming to you as martyrs in our millions. Can you believe? The day which they go to Mubarak, you think they'd have other things on their mind. The first thing on their mind of millions of people inside Tahrir Square is liberation of Palestine. Libya, when we saw the opening of Libya, again, I saw people on Al Jazeera with their signs saying Al-Quds, Quds, and they're coming for Quds next. The Palestinian issue beats so deeply in the heart of the Muslims inside the area. So they want the liberation, and they also want an Islamic alternative. These are all the desires of the people of the region, and the current solutions which are in place so-called solutions after these revolutions or uprisings definitely are more about maintaining the status quo than changing the status quo, and I hope that we can go into that into more detail during the question and answers. Thank you very much.